I'd like to welcome you back. We're missing one, but he'll show up here in a minute.
Mary? Oh.
She's coming back.
Hey, we lost our crowd, man.
I know.
Talk about money, everybody's interested. Talk about solid waste,
Not so much. That's where the real money is. That's the solid waste. Okay, next item is 5.04. Timed item that we've kind of passed the time. We've got a few things to do. Who is going to? Mike?
I'm going to start and then turn it over to staff real quickly. And I just want to, this is our second workshop on sort of the landfill and its future. And one of the things I just want to put just a seed in everybody's head before we get moving on this is, I think traditionally people think of landfills as sort of just a liability and as a cost factor and as sort of completely in negative terms. I think one of the things that we're trying to look at as we look into the future of the Neal Road landfill is that it's not necessarily just a liability. It is actually, I think, and partially and almost mainly actually because of the way the board has made some land use decisions in a general plan, it offers an opportunity. One of the things that we are seeing is research all over the world, quite frankly, on ways that we can deal with our trash differently. How do we turn, again, trash into energy? How do we create energy out of sun? How do we create energy out of wind? How do we turn these things that traditionally have been viewed, again, as negatives into positives? And I think what this board has done is, assuming that we can get our revenues under control and get a proper flow, which is one of our recommendations today, that we well situate our landfill for incredible opportunities and actually economic development and job creation in the future. And that's what I think we're trying to do in looking at some of these things today. And it's even somewhat what you're going to hear about the Glenn County proposal is to create a solid waste or a waste to energy facility in Glenn County. I guess my argument, sort of tipping our hand on our recommendation, is we think we could do the same thing here in Butte County at our landfill, is that this board has created a buffer zone and in a general plan type of environment where we can attract waste to energy users, where we can attract solar, where we can attract wind, where we already are doing a methane gas type of extraction unit, that we can turn, again, that landfill, which is traditionally looked at as only a liability, into a job-producing asset. We have researchers at Chico State that are excited about some of these new technologies and new ways of looking at municipal waste and how you can deal with it differently, diversion, recycle programs. And I think that's what we're trying to look at today. We think the Neal Road landfill is just an opportunity, and that's what we're trying to. How do we make it work better? How do we stabilize its revenues and look towards a future? And so, with that, I'd like to turn it over to our staff to kind of work through this.
Go.
Good morning, Chair Lambert and Board of Supervisors. As the CAO mentioned, this is our second workshop concerning. Oops, there we go. Concerning sustainable revenue, and just a little bit of refresher at the last workshop, the board directed staff, you were interested to have staff project gate fees using various scenarios, a do nothing scenario, increase and decrease in tonnage, what if the city of Chico delivered their waste there, etc. You wanted to know about cost of state-mandated programs and our financial assurance liabilities for the landfill going forward. You wanted to know some information about franchise agreements as a way to bring additional waste to the facility. And lastly, you wanted additional information on waste-to-energy facility in Glenn County. Now, these next couple slides, I think, are very fundamental to the county's waste management program, and it's a little bit of a review what the gate fees fund. This is important for you to know. The discretionary waste management programs account for $2.32 of our tipping fee, which is $37.61. Those fund illegal dumping, the roadside litter cleanups, community cleanup grants, etc. The mandatory programs required under the county integrated waste management program deal with the material that cannot go into the landfill, but all businesses and homeowners generate, and that's household hazardous waste and universal waste. And of course, we're required to have an educational component to educate the public on what to do with these type of products and to maintain the integrity of the landfill by recycling them or otherwise disposing of them properly. That's $5.07 per ton. That leaves $30.22 per ton for the Neal Road Recycling and Waste Facility, and it's important to point out that 29% of that per ton rate goes to service the debt, the 2006 bond that we sold to develop the infrastructure at the landfill, which was the new waste modules that complied with the federal standards, design and construction standards. That leaves us $21.40 to actually operate the landfill, and included in that is our contributions to the financial assurance funds that we'll discuss right now. The financial assurance funds are required by the state. They want to ensure that we have enough money set aside that when the landfill closes, we have funds, 100% of the funds needed to close the landfill. Now, you'll see that we have an estimate of $7.2 million. Our current fund balance is $3.2 million in that account. Those are restricted monies in account, represents about 44% of the current cost estimate. And as it would be, about 44% of our airspace, the design airspace at the landfill, is consumed. Now, there's strategy behind that, and there's a requirement behind that, that if your landfill is 50% consumed of airspace, you have to have 50% of your closure funds set aside, and you contribute annually to those closure costs. And that's the important point of that. We have to fund that annually going forward.
And are we on target for that?
We are on target for that, exactly. So every year we set aside, or should set aside, between $100,000 and $200,000 to fund that. So when we're 100% consumed of our airspace, we have 100% of our cost estimate. Now, that's in 2011 dollars. Obviously, we go forward, we have to make some adjustments for 2012 dollars, et cetera. Corrective action component, this would be if we had some type of release to groundwater that we had to mitigate. And that's current cost estimate is $1.6 million, and that is fully funded. So we have $4.8 million set aside in restricted funds for those two purposes at this point. The cost to maintain the landfill after the landfill closes is also a county liability, and that current cost estimate is $7.7 million for the first 30 years after closure. Now, we satisfy, rather than having a fund that's set aside with $7.7 million in that, the state allows the county to have a pledge of revenue agreement, and it's a formal agreement that was signed by the board, approved by the board, between the county and the state of California. And it's a pledge that future gate fees will fund that obligation, which is, it's $256,000 per year. That's an estimate of when we close the landfill 40 years from now or something. So that's an important thing to remember. Gate fee scenarios, you wanted staff to present to you, and we're doing so with 5 scenarios. What would happen under scenario 1 if we had the same tonnage coming in per year for the next 3 years, which is about 136,000 tons per year? What would the gate fee look like? Number 2 is decrease in tons 2% a year. Number 3, 2% increase per year for 3 years. Number 4, what would it look like if we had all the waste from the city of Chico coming to the Neal Road landfill? Currently we have some, but we don't have all. And lastly, what would the gate fee look like if we had all of the waste generated in Butte County come to the Neal Road landfill? We had to come up with some assumptions. So the assumptions that we had was that our increases in expenses would be 2% per year. We would replace the heavy equipment at the recommended 10,000 hour interval, which is a break point between maximum trade-in value and the point where your cost to operate per hour increase pretty dramatically. Our assumption was that we would have annual contribution to our state-mandated financial assurance funds. We would maintain all discretionary and mandatory programs that we currently have, and that we had no capital improvement projects over the next 3 years, being a new waste cell development, for example.
What about capitalization as far as equipment? Is that in your 2%?
We have one of the assumptions, and I believe it's let's see.
Okay.
I think it's in the staff report. It's an accrual fund set up for equipment replacement. So scenario number one, current tonnage for the next 3 years. You'll see that at the current fee, $37.61, after 3 fiscal years is $41.19, and off on the right-hand margin, you'll see what that equates to on an increase per year, increase or decrease per year. You'll note that between the current and this next fiscal year, there's a 6% increase. Is because we have not factored in for the last couple years equipment replacement funds, and we had been at a point where we were ahead in the game a little bit in our financial assurance mechanisms. So we skipped a year in contribution because we were on pace. So we skipped a year, and that maintained us at $37.61 per ton in an effort to keep rates as low as possible in a tough time. Decrease in tons, 2% per year for the next 3 years. At the end of the third fiscal year, you'll see $43.76 per ton, and you'll see again that there's an increase each year in the tipping fee that would be required to meet the expense obligations of the waste management program. Increase tons 2% a year. As you would think that it would improve. So our gate fee requirements would actually start trending down, and you'll see in fiscal year 2012-13 and the next fiscal year there's actually a reduction in gate fees. And then with the City of Chico tons, you'll see that after the same amount of fiscal years, we actually have a decrease in gate fee requirement, which would be $1.29 less than the current gate fee. And it would equate to about $686,000 in additional revenue coming into the landfill at our current gate fee of $37.61. Now, the purpose of showing you the cost per ton is if we had to pay for our expenses merely on gate fees, this is what it would look like. With all of Butte County tons, you'll see it's pretty dramatic. We're looking at an additional $1.2 million in additional revenue at the current gate fee, and after the third fiscal year, $4.53 less than the current cost of $37.61. Now, we would be presented with some options with this additional revenue, whatever it may be. We could reduce gate fees. We could fund an additional or enhanced recycling or waste-related program, or we could maintain the current gate fees. And if we maintain the current gate fees, we would realize that additional cost, or that additional revenue, and with that, we could fully fund our financial assurance obligations. We could accrue funds for the next waste cell development and not rely on a bond or some other financing mechanism. We would actually have that reserved and pay for it. And we could invest in additional renewable energy projects that would create additional revenue streams. As the CAO mentioned earlier, the interest in renewable energy projects is exponential at this time. We literally get calls every week wanting to do something with our waste. Now, some of them we discount. Some of them we actually think have merit, and we've actually suggested to people, if you want to try a demonstration project on gasification to create activated carbon, we'd be glad to participate, and there's some serious interest. There's also additional interest in Butte County for anaerobic digestion to supplement current existing infrastructure at some of the power plants. So this is really taking off. How do we get additional waste to the landfill? Well, currently, we require through our ordinance that all waste generated in the unincorporated areas have to come to the county facility. But the cities don't have to because they have their own regulatory schemes. But through a contract or a franchise and a contract, we can have conditions in there that they can bring waste that they pick up in a municipal area to the Neal Road landfill, as long as the municipality goes along with it and doesn't want to direct the flow of waste themselves, which, as you may or may not remember, flow control, it works for the county and the unincorporated areas of the county because it's county to a county facility. So you're allowed to do that. But through contracting, we can do some of these things that we can't necessarily do by ordinance. That's the attractiveness of a franchise.
What about the cities? We would contract with the cities too?
Potentially could.
Okay.
Potentially could. So what we developed, we believe in talking with the haulers that there's some real likelihood that franchises could provide additional waste flow to the Neal Road facility. And what you saw in those rate scenarios is that the more waste that you bring into the facility, the lower gate fee would have to be to sustain. Or, on the other way of looking at it, there's more revenue that you can use to invest in your next waste module without relying on a bond or additional renewable energy projects for additional waste streams, and it kind of self-perpetuates as you go forward. So what we did is a little pros and cons of the franchise, and this is not an exclusive list. There's probably others, but just a few things to point out to the board is that franchises through a contract can definitely provide a sustainable source of revenue, as you saw in some of those rate scenarios. It's better collection efficiencies, more dense. Instead of having customers hither and yon, you condense it, and so you have lower costs, you have less impact on the roads, less vehicles for the different companies on the same road, reduced carbon footprint. Speaking to the Climate Action Plan a little bit earlier in one of the other presentations, and it protects consumers through price controls. Currently, you have an open market, and haulers are free to choose what they want. Price controls are usually set to some type of indice that everybody agrees to in the contract or in the franchise agreement. And additionally, it's stable revenue for the hauler. The hauler knows that he has a certain amount of customer and growth within that area he can count on, and he's able to finance his operation a little better. Now the cons. Elected officials have to, as I put it in quotes, that's the presumption, is approved collection rates. Now the city of Chico has come up with an administrative process tied to indices, and each year they submit their formulas, and it's an administrative process, and I believe the city council just concurs with the city manager's determination.
And
but
do you have a history on that of how much that's gone up in comparison? Just to give me an idea.
I think probably the haulers in the audience could probably speak to that, but I can tell you, having been a previous hauler, that it used to be a very contentious process, and once that administrative process was put into place, it's not a contentious process any longer. And
Can collection rates be part of the issuance of a franchise?
Yes.
We can put limits on.
Right.
In other words, if you're low bid, you can't come back in a year. If the board in position of having to raise the rates, you're going to have to live with your bid.
Yep, sharpen your.
I believe all.
That would take that contention off to approving the collection rate. We'll pre-approve on the issuance of the franchise. Would be my idea.
Yeah, I think you can address any of those issues in the contract, certainly, and it has to be a win-win for everybody. The second con I have up there is the perception of, the lack of customer right to choose the haulers.
I hear that a lot.
And you can and probably will hear that, but there is a lot of positive that goes with a regulatory scheme in managing the waste collection programs as opposed to kind of a laissez-faire. And then lastly, in a con, the hauler's perspective is he may be in an area that he feels that there's constraints on growth and profit. And some of those things will be, those ideas will be addressed in this next slide. The goals of a franchise basically is to increase the waste generated in Butte County, and I think there's been some things in the paper about importing waste from other counties. I don't believe that's our intent. We'd like to see the waste generated in Butte County come to the county facility, and that equals sustainable revenue.
And I mentioned that at the LTF. In regards to increasing rates generated in Butte County, you know, I want to make sure that the public realizes, whichever way we do this, that they realize that when we do diversion, there's a double-edged sword. As we divert and get to 50% recyclables and it goes away, our revenues across the gate come down. And if we had that sustainable waste stream coming to the landfill, it would give us some revenue generation. And people don't realize that, well, don't you not want the garbage to come to Butte County so that we don't have to deal with it and the landfill will last longer? Whereas the case is, it's actually the opposite. It's a double-edged sword in regards to revenues and waste in versus operation of the facility itself.
That's correct. And we have a lot of capacity. With the growth rates that were used of 3.3% per year, when some of the earlier landfill projections were used, and 2034 was an anticipated closure date, and we all know that growth rate didn't happen, probably won't happen. There's more recycling, et cetera. There's more that we do with construction demolition materials. There's a market for waste as a renewable energy project. We know that the Neal Road landfill will have a renewable energy project going forward. It's going to make sense. We understand it. Mike's going to talk to you a little bit about that in a minute, and we've been preparing for it all along. So you're right. The waste that will be placed in the Neal Road landfill in the future is going to be significantly less than it is now, and we have capacity for a long, long time.
Just real quickly, because I just want to add two other goals that we as staff have said that if we're going to go down a franchise route that we want to make sure we do, and that is no diminishment in the quality of the service, and that rates would have to be the same. I mean, so that we're not looking at going into a franchise with increasing rates to create those franchise. So I think we've been upfront with the haulers that in addition that we want the waste coming to the landfill so we can stabilize that, but that we're not interested in looking at something that's going to increase rates or diminish quality of service.
Exactly. And I think the last bullet point shows transparency and fairness has got to be a requirement. Now, franchises have been looked at before. I know I was on the other side of the fence 8 or 9 years ago. But it's a different time. There's a different need, and I think the city of Chico is finding that out themselves. A recent city council action directed staff and the sustainability task force to work with the county and explore franchising options. They also directed their staff to provide notice to the haulers in that area that they intended to franchise within 5 years. So the Butte County Code, a long time ago, was established to mirror the solid waste programs for the city of Chico area for the unincorporated areas around and inside the city limits of the city of Chico. And it's a pretty consistent way to manage the waste in that area, and it's a regional management tool, and it works. So that brings us to the last item that you asked us to explore, and that was the KVB, or the North State Solid Waste Conversion Facility for Glenn County, and in which the proponents were requesting that the county contribute to a feasibility study and possibly direct the waste over to their facility. Now, staff has met with the folks. We understand what they want to do. We've seen the business plan that's presented to the Glenn County, and we have some significant concerns with that. Obviously, the information that we've presented to you earlier in the presentation is without gate fees, the county could not fund our unfunded portion of the closure funds of the landfill, the closure cost of the landfill, $4 million. Mandated program at $550,000 per year. Discretionary programs. And lastly, our post-closure maintenance cost obligations of $7.7 million. And we wouldn't be able to uphold our agreement with the state of California regarding our pledge of revenue as a funding mechanism for those post-closure costs. And lastly, higher disposal cost. The business plan that we've seen calls for a net $70 a ton after incentives are paid to get the waste there, after they pay Glenn County for their closure costs of their landfill. Now, Glenn County is a critical juncture. They need to either expand the landfill, close the landfill, or come up with a different alternative. And this potentially could work for Glenn County. We're in a much different situation. There also has a provision in some of the information that I've seen where they pay landfills for potential lost revenue if waste were to be directed away from another landfill out of the area to that facility. So the bottom line is, I think you're looking at a tipping fee well over $100 a ton, which is real consistent with the Santa Barbara anaerobic digestion proposal, which is in the same price range, with a much greater waste tonnage that goes into that facility.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in here. Mike Crump, Director of Public Works. The KVB project, the technology that they're looking at is the future, for, or that type of technology is the future for solid waste. If you recall, last June we gave this board a report on the concept of an energy farm, and that was one of the concepts we looked at as a future component for our Neal Road facility. And so we see that as certainly something that is going to be looked at very strongly in the future for a number of agencies, including us here in Butte County. And as Bill mentioned, both Santa Barbara County and LA County are looking at this, and the $100 tipping fee is the range that really is what makes it economically viable, and certainly well above what we have of our $37.61 per ton. At some point, it's going to make sense for Butte County, and when it does, I think it's going to be incumbent for us to look at what's best for Butte County and the Neal Road landfill. And I think our facility is geared towards this type of development in the future, and that's what we're looking at. And I think we want to make sure if we are going to create jobs and economic development, really Butte County is the place we should be looking at that in the future. But that's going to be really a future project. For the time being, I think the technology we're looking at is much more what we're working on today, and this will be in a future endeavor.
And the only reason why it's viable for Glenn County is they're running out of capacity, or they have. I don't quite get why Glenn County would pursue something that's going to cost their citizens more money. I'm always trying to save money.
I know, Ryan Johnson's in here, and I think he'll want to have an opportunity to talk, and maybe he can address some of the reasons for Glenn County wanting to move down this line.
Yes, we've offered the opportunity for them to get 5 or 10 minutes to do their presentation, so I think that's a perfect question to ask them, Supervisor.
And I think just to finalize a thought is that this comes from a biomass council workshop that was at Chico State, and it's the barriers to implementing these type of facilities: regulation, waste handling licenses, air permits, water permits, access to energy transmission infrastructure, transportation, long-term contracts for source of supply, waste, access to markets, and political support. And I would propose to you that the Neal Road facility has met or jumped most of those hurdles. We certainly have the infrastructure through our landfill gas to energy project. We have a substation that will be starting to be built next month, and we can put forth a lot of additional renewable energy projects into that pipeline onto the grid that's already there. So, thank you. We'll be available to answer any questions as a follow-up.
Recommendations? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Getting ahead of myself. So the requested action that we have of the board, and apologize, I'm going to read through, there's a few. Direct staff to not participate in the proposed North State Solid Waste Conversion Facility project in Glenn County. Requested action number 2 is direct staff to continue to work with the haulers on proposed franchise agreements for the unincorporated areas of the county with the intent to increase flow of municipal solid waste to the Neal Road Recycling and Waste Facility, and negotiate and return to the board for consideration of hiring a consultant to review and consider proposed franchise areas funded by the 3 major haulers. Number 3, direct staff to issue a formal notice to the current license holders that the county will be pursuing possibly establishing some form of a solid waste franchise collection system in the unincorporated areas within 5 years. And lastly, direct staff to work with the municipalities in the county to coordinate solid waste collection programs for the unincorporated areas and forward its recommendation to the board for consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I think what I'd like to do is, if we can, want to go down and do itemize one down through. Maybe get Ryan to come up now and do your presentation so we can deal with it, number 1 and direct staff to participate in the Glenn County. Is that all right with you guys to do that? Bring it down. I know. That Ricky dictator. Yeah. We'd be at lunch right now with my wife. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Fortunately, I've made it to that point in life where these are essential for doing any kind of process like this.
Yeah. I'm still fighting it.
There you go.
I can't.
I know that. I saw you the other
Yeah, I
day.
can't. You see, I give it longer and already. I'm not.
I don't need glasses.
That's why I went to the computer. It's at 139%. I can read it fine.
Oh, you have it blown up now?
Yeah, 139. It's right there.
Do we have that, or did you pass that out, this
I will
program?
be happy to provide it to the board after the presentation. I'm sorry I wasn't given an opportunity to distribute this. But that's not to say that I wasn't given an opportunity. I just didn't know that that was an opportunity.
Okay.
Right. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to address the board. I'm Ryan Johnson, consultant to KVB, Inc. To my left is Kara Baker.
CEO of KVB, Inc. Thank you.
We've had an opportunity to meet with each of you individually, and we've also met with staff. And I want to, first of all, thank you. And we very much appreciate the opportunity to discuss this project. I guess the thing that we'd like to present first is that the problem of disposing of solid waste is not something that will unfortunately go away in the next 2 to 3 years. It's a problem that will be with our society for an awful long period of time. It's a situation which is, as we all know, currently just entering into a phase of great metamorphosis. And what I think that we're going to see here on a national basis, because of the trends that are happening around the world, is that there will be a very rapid point, a tipping point, pardon the pun, where the technology that has been used in the past will become seen by the public, and thus will become a situation on policymakers to act in ways that will achieve an ever-increasing rate of urgency. And a question was asked in Glenn County, why is a circumstance happened where all of a sudden they're looking at this technology? And I think, for better or for worse, Glenn County has been caught in that kind of the dip of the curve where 10 years ago people didn't give an awful lot of consideration to this technology and to the problems of solid waste disposal as we're looking at it now, and not the problem of disposing of waste, but the increasing costs of maintaining outdated technology for disposing of waste. And that is really the issue that I think policy makers have to look forward to, is that when you look at the technology of landfills, it is outdated technology fundamentally. It's outdated absolutely from an environmental policy perspective. It's outdated from a social perspective. And we are becoming not only more aware of the environmental problems associated with this technology, but quite frankly, the economy is overtaking this technology. And what we're seeing in the terms of recycling, both the mentality of recycling, which no one would deny, has become a clear concern on the part of the citizens that we want to recycle more, we want to recycle everything that we possibly can recycle, and we want to use those materials as best we can to generate new products, services, and jobs in our area. So to take a retrofitted idea that, quite frankly, was about exactly the opposite. It was about, and the business deal that landfills really involve is taking as much waste, everything possible, and putting it in a landfill. And this is what is fundamentally the change. So you have the staff report, and we've seen it as well. I'd like to point out some key critical differences between the Neal Road landfill, and quite frankly, most landfills, maybe all landfills today, and the NSSWCF, or the North State Solid Waste Conversion Facility. You have within Neal Road, as it's laid out in the staff report, what would be called a residual deal, where you take all cost, subtract the revenues, and you have a remaining cost or a residual cost divided by tonnage. And so if you just look at the math, the key thing to understand is that if you increase the cost or decrease the tonnage, mathematically, the costs go up. So to your point, Supervisor Yamaguchi, the efforts that the county is doing and that we are educating our children to become more steward of, and that is to recycle, directly works against this business deal. And unfortunately, this is the business deal that Butte County is in, that the more you educate the public to recycle, the lower the amount of waste goes across the gate, the higher the tipping fee. Equally, if you have greater costs associated with anything, there's a 2% CPI associated with employee cost. I would ask you if you've actually seen simply a 2% cost in employee cost rises over the last 10 years, or if it has actually been greater than that. But it's your number one cost item at that landfill. There is no capital cost in the projections over the first 3 years. Is that really truly realistic that this facility would be operated with no capital investment in it, and yet you're going to produce economic development? You're going to plan for future improvements at this facility, and yet you're not going to invest in it. You're not going to invest in it in future people. You're not going to invest in it in future planning. Is that realistic? The other reality of this is your tonnage is actually diminishing. And I know this meeting is effectively at one level about trying to encourage providers or potential providers of waste within Butte County to bring the waste here to Neal Road. And you might be able to do that through political processes, but you'll get that increase once. Not each year, forever. You'll get it once. After that one incremental increase, the only way that waste is going to increase is if you get an increase in population precipitously, or you get an increase in activities that produce waste, when everything we know is that population is not increasing dramatically in Butte County, and every effort is to reduce the amount of waste that we're sending to landfill. So every deal that we do down at the I-Hub or the Green Waste Facility, what have you, that pushes waste products into new products that we herald and we encourage more, takes waste out of your facility at the landfill, making it a more dependent facility on the gate fee. And that's your only compensating revenue source. If you look at the projections that are put up,
with that statement.
If you look at the projections that are in the staff report, your non-gate fee revenue is constant. It's not increasing. And what you're doing out there in terms of technology and your methane offtake is a retrofit to a facility that wasn't designed to produce energy. It was designed to capture waste. What will happen now is that two things will increase: your diversion requirements and your associated legislation and regulatory requirements around maintaining that facility, all of which will drive up costs. Your technology to produce energy from that facility will always be less efficient than a facility that was created to produce energy. One other very important aspect of this is that the waste conversion facility has at its very core a state-of-the-art recycling facility called a MRF, and it is state-of-the-art. So while you are recycling, thus diverting now, you would divert far more material from any landfill, or for that matter, any energy production, through this MRF facility. You would become state-of-the-art in recycling. Right now, that is not the case, and you don't have investment projected to get there. What's the result of this is non-gate revenue, according to the staff study, is at about 15%. It's actually somewhere between 10 and 15%. The remaining is the residual component of gate fee. That's your own report. With the waste conversion facility, you look at the same exact items, but you combine the items. So you look at all capital costs. It's not just the cost to build the facility, it's the cost of maintaining, from a capital perspective, the landfills that would be affected in this region were the waste to be aggregated. That is, if Butte County were to participate in this process, the study would absolutely look at the capital requirements of the Neal Road facility. You would look at operating costs, but because what we're proposing, and there are many ways of doing a deal around this, but the best way, the most efficient way to do this deal would be to combine the asset of the waste, the disposal facilities, which are Neal Road, and the hauling. Now, I know that's controversial, but from a board perspective, to look at this strategically at this juncture, which is the opportunity of this study, is critical. You have an opportunity to look at alternative ways of managing this problem, if you will, this facility, this community requirement. So we would look at ways of more efficiently managing the existing facilities that are there, that would be incorporated in this catchment area for the waste, which could include areas beyond Butte and Glenn County. Program costs, which are essential, which is what you're looking at in terms of funding with the additional waste increment that you would bring in from Chico and other areas within Butte County, could be looked at regionally amongst those who participate in this study in this area, and could be managed at a greater and more efficient level. And finally, closure cost, as applicable, because we're not saying that this process would immediately result in the closure of Butte County landfill or Neal Road landfill. What we're saying is, in fact, it would prolong the life still further of this facility. So we're not saying that we would close the Neal Road landfill as a preferred option. When you put that together in a combined asset manner, what you end up with is exactly the opposite of what you have under the existing Neal Road landfill as a business proposition. Non-gate fees, that is revenue generated from the production of energy, the significantly enhanced production of recyclable materials that would be sold off of this, thus those two together, diversion, would equal 80 to 85% of the total revenue, plus additional revenues within, as I said, the consolidated asset. Gate fees would equal approximately 15 to 20%. And that is the difference from a business perspective that this facility provides over the landfill. And the landfill will never compete with this facility on that basis. Critical market difference. The waste source, Butte County, it is decreasing in volume, and it will continue to decrease in volume. You are looking at a decrease at 2%. You could see, if diversion requirements were to bite on this county within the next 5 years, you could easily see a 1-year 10% decrease in volume mandated. So if you look at the business that you're in, you're praying that volume is going to increase continuously in order to maintain your position. But the reality is that your volume is going to decrease as it has decreased, and your staff report doesn't point that out. You are looking at an asset that is losing value. You will have increasing diversion requirements, thus decreasing opportunities for all landfills to compete for waste. The only means that you will have as a facility provider, operator, to compete for waste will be to try to keep your gate fee low. That's it. And try to reduce it. That is your means of competition, which means you're going to have to reduce costs, which means that you're going to have to reduce staffing, which means that you're going to have to reduce capital investment. Otherwise, your gate fees will increase. And I submit to you that your gate fees will increase far more than what's shown in that report by simply by the result of the decreasing volume of waste. Ultimately, what you'll have is an increasing pressure on operating requirements, plant and equipment upkeep, expansion and closure costs will become a greater burden than what you're presently seeing. And you are moving toward the situation that is presently faced and as a crisis in Glenn County. With the waste conversion facility, you have multiple potential providers of waste, and we're talking to all of these counties, Glenn, Butte, Tehama, Colusa, and others. And the others are really critical because those others are in Sacramento, the Bay Area, up the I-5 corridor. And when a facility like this comes online, and were it to be constructed and Butte County wasn't to participate, it would compete with waste to bring that waste over the line to increase diversion opportunities for communities like Chico, who have in their charter and who have accepted or have voted on policy to become more green, more sustainable. So the creation of a facility like this anywhere where your waste could potentially be diverted to will put increased pressure on Butte County and the Neal Road landfill. This project will drive diversion requirements. By its very existence, diversion requirements will increase because the public debate will insist upon it. Waste will,
At that price?
the price that you're paying right now assumes that there are no alternatives. If legislation said you must divert 70%, your price would go up beyond $70. So it's artificially low by virtue of the existing regulatory environment, which will change as soon as one of these facilities is created in the state of California anywhere, because it's possible to do. Now, we're also saying that you have the opportunity to be on the ground floor and to be on the first project that will be permittable because of this technology, and thus you will get the best possible economic deal. Waste will become available for other areas to the conversion facility, and the logistics of the I-5 corridor will play dramatically in the business decision of private investors who will back this facility compared to public debt that will be out to expand and improve your facility. Critical economic difference. Neal Road landfill is outdated technology. There are truly few attractive investment opportunities for a landfill of that size in a regional area that's more or less landlocked in a non-attractive access corridor that you're going to compete harder and harder and harder for waste from surrounding areas that will be under greater pressure to divert waste out of landfills. So your competitive situation is going to decline. Secondary technology advancements, that's the retrofitting of methane to hive off. Look at your revenue generation, look at the future of that. There's little or no economic development potential out of the landfill itself. The economic development potential is out of the transition to next stage technology. You have no investment set aside, you have no capital set aside to invest in the study of that technology, nor the development of that technology. You will be inherently dependent on private investment to come in and take that project over, and private investors will look at the access corridor along the I-5 more advantageously than the 70 corridor. The waste conversion facility is state-of-the-art technology. As staff has said, it's the way of the future. There are huge opportunities for industry research and development, enormous private investment opportunities, and game-changing regional economic development potential. So the last question is, why wouldn't you do this? The political difference. Things will never be better than they are now at the Neal Road landfill. They will never be better than they are now. Your costs are increasing. Your revenue will increase if you get the total amount of waste once. After that, your costs and the waste will create an ever-increasing gap. Your capital costs have not been kept up with. Your operating costs are rising. Your regulatory requirements will increase significantly. Do nothing is simply a recipe for future failure. The world of waste is changing. The way of the future is solid waste disposal is in the area of what we're proposing. We have a globally leading technology provider. We are a highly capable project team who have done privatization projects around the world as sophisticated as this. This is an invaluable opportunity for the board to learn about this technology and to see if you can put together an economic deal that makes sense for you now before time runs out and you have fewer and fewer opportunities. And effectively, there is no cost for Butte County of this study. And that is because while we asked for $7,500, because we wanted Butte County to have skin in the game, Recology has offered to put up that residual $7,500. And so what we're saying to you is that we would pay the full freight of this study. We simply want you to participate as a stakeholder, as if you had invested in this, and to look at this legitimately. So this is an opportunity to learn at no cost, at no risk. If we put together a commercial deal which is unattractive, you walk away. If we can put together a commercial deal that clearly is better than the Neal Road landfill, why wouldn't you do it? When you look at the way this project could be financed, you could literally be looking at locking in rates for a prolonged period of time, as much as 20 to 30 years, depending upon how you negotiated this deal. That is absolutely something that you cannot get with the Neal Road landfill
How could you
facility.
negotiate something for 20 to 30 years out length when we all know just in the last 2 years the cost of fuel? I'm looking at the cost of fuel for the Paradise franchise when they first started out, and the fuel of what it is then, what was that, 5 years ago, guys? 5 years ago versus today. And you're going to project those transportation costs 30 years down the road?
No, what in a privatization process, depending upon how the public entity structures the bidding process, you, as a board, as a participating board, could require that rates be projected for a period of time, 5, 10, 30 years. You could require it. As a private investor, I will price in the risk on that market. So while I'm not saying that rates won't increase within the projected period of time, we could negotiate, you as a board could negotiate certainty within any number of means. You could predict certainty absolutely that rates will not go above what is projected, and we would price that in from an investment perspective, or we could agree to 5-year increments or 2-year adjustment increments. The issue is risk, and what it looks like from a private investor, and this gets sort of back to the discussion you were having, at the earlier session, it simply is how you look at risk going forward. So if the private investor is responsible for attracting waste to this facility from other environments who, like San Francisco, have a zero waste policy and a very high cost of disposing of that waste, if that consortia could attract waste from that other area, then the profit on that waste would compensate, subsidize waste in other areas. So it's a fundamentally different way of looking at the business, if you will, of waste disposal. And that's what we're saying is an opportunity for you to participate on. We would very much appreciate the opportunity to work with you and to staff to complete this feasibility study. We think it would be a tremendous opportunity for this board to look into the future and to see options and opportunities with a private consortia that is dedicated to the well-being of not just Glenn County. We live in Butte County. We are citizens of Butte County. We absolutely want to see Butte County thrive. This is an opportunity to see into the future and to look at what could happen to help support private industry, looking at Butte County and the whole of the North State as an area where this type of project, as your own staff has said, is the way of the future. What we're saying is that future opportunity is here now, and we ask for your support in participating in this feasibility study at no cost to Butte County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan, if you proceed with what you're doing, what would be the staff involvement or the ancillary costs other than money that you would require from Butte County?
Sure, and that's a great question, and thank you for asking that. Supervisor Wall and the board, we can't do this study legitimately without staff involvement, and frankly, we'd like to say without the board's involvement as well. And the reason for that is that we need data. We need to make sure that staff's question and the board's questions about this future deal are raised so that the study addresses them. So we would want staff involved with the scoping of this study. We would need staff involvement for the provision of data. And we couldn't possibly put together an economic proposal, a structure, without presenting that to the board and discussing the advantages and disadvantages, the attractiveness of that. So there would be involvement. And what we would hope is, and this is why, frankly, we asked for money, what we hoped was that staff would embrace this and the board would embrace this opportunity and participate willingly. I can't tell you the number of hours, but it would certainly be, what we are asking for is willing participation.
So would staff get involved in the RFP for the study too, or who would fashion the RFP for the study?
There wouldn't be an RFP. We're suggesting that the next step would be to scope the study. We will do the study, but
You will do the study, and you're going to show how Butte County would be whole
exactly.
yourself. Oh,
Well, our consortium. That
Okay.
includes the technology provider, Recology, and other associated consultants, absolutely.
Well, what about, you're saying that this is good for Butte County, and you're talking how it's going to actually bring dollars in. How is this revenue sharing agreement going to be formulated? What piece of the pie do we get for taking our waste to your facility?
It's a great question, and if you hired me, I'd tell you that. No, I'm just being... Well, okay, so clearly your exposure from a capital perspective has got to be addressed. There's no question about that. Changes in operation would be factored into the economic model, depending upon how you structured the asset. For instance, is it simply waste provision? Is it waste provision and management of the Neal Road landfill? Is it waste provision, management of the Neal Road landfill, and hauling provision structured accordingly? Any one of those considerations changes significantly the economics of the deal.
You have to consider them all. You can't throw out one or be selective.
No, you're right, exactly. But what we could say